Welcome to the Emptive podcast, where we chat about cloud-based solutions that make selling your e-commerce products easier, more profitable, and effective. Today, we'll be digging into the power of suggestion with e-commerce recommendation engines. What are they? What kinds of recommendation systems are being used today by big companies like Amazon and Netflix? But also, how can the rest of us get into the machine learning and AI world right now?
I would say reviews would be the number one that when people think of recommendations, I think that would be, come top of mind. And that could be, like you said, positive or negative, right? And generally those are sort of from strangers, right? People you don't immediately know. And sometimes they're, right, just Mary or John, and you would never know them, right? So I think the other ones would be like frequently bought together. Again, other things like that are on the website that's sort of on an e-commerce platform push you towards something. If you bought this, you might want to add this to the shopping basket, or
The Amazon-esque stuff.
Amazon-esque, yep.
Yeah.
That one comes top of mind. And I think another good one would be like they call them action feeds. Hey, someone else in Seattle just bought this. Wouldn't you like to buy it too? So
Okay,
kind of like,
that's what that's called, an action feed?
that's the term I've sort of found or
Yeah.
coined.
I
But
always see them pop up, and I'm like,
the pop-ups usually, right, or jet
who's doing
ins or
that?
some kind of overlay. And those they can go to the part of the mind that says, "Ooh, I want to be part of the pack,"
Right, yeah.
or somebody else, cooler than me is doing this. I need to do it. I imagine it works pretty well psychologically.
Right.
Um,
And then did you say suggested products? Did you lump that with
no, I
frequently
didn't.
bought
That was
together?
another one. Yep, suggested. And then I would think a good one would be referrals. People don't
Right.
think of it
Yeah. I
that
mean,
way, but it
referral is
is
that.
recommending. Now that's not a stranger. Now that's the opposite. That's an influencer, maybe people could be really well, or just know in your same circle.
Right.
I think influencers really fall into that line, right? What is there? You can pair products together, isn't that like
Yeah. Like
and
this pairs
bundles,
well. This
right?
pairs
Things that
well with that.
right. So if you're, wine with this cheese, or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So pairings would be another recommendation. It may have, it could be a bundle too. You might combine things that do, and then say, well, don't buy this single product, buy the bundle, right? I've seen that a
Right.
lot.
And all of it sort of stems from that human longing of like wanting to be a part of something. You kind of mentioned that a little bit ago. It
Yeah,
sort of all flows into that area of the mind where you want to be
right.
in the pack, sort of.
Yeah, it tugs on those areas of the mind where you want to be. We're all family creatures, right? You know what I mean? The human species wants to be part of a family.
Oh yeah.
So, I mean, I think it tugs on that. I would did a little research before for today's show, is that 91% of people claim they either actively or, occasionally look at reviews, which is pretty high. That means there's only a small sliver of people who, for whatever reason, don't or didn't in the survey say that they do. And 84%, I think, was the number of people who trust. There was a trust factor. So there's a high trust factor. Now, I would be not one in that group.
Right, which is so interesting because
That's just not. But
some of these reviews, like we know that they're not always ethical. Like they're made
or
up or fake.
well, right, and totally. You've heard all the stories on Amazon because they get all the politics. But think of
Right,
that, just
right.
the average website where nobody's looking. I mean, um, so something like 68%, another 70%. After reading one or two, form an opinion, and they don't have to read up to like 6 reviews, and then they kind of have it. And in my case, I'm looking for I'm like a lot of other people. I'm looking for the negative review. I skip
Right,
over a
right.
lot of the positive, but because I'm looking for some information, and I think a lot of people do that too. And I weigh 2 or 3 negative with 2 or 3 positive. So I guess it's 6. I don't read more than that. I mean, but
See, I don't always give the positives as much weight
no, me either. I
as
would
a
agree
negative.
with
Like if I see a negative one and it's negative to the feature that like I most want that product for, boom,
that.
I'm
Oh
out. Like I'm out the
yeah,
door. I'm like,
yeah.
okay,
That's
wait
the
now.
first thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So I think one of the reasons why reviews are so important is because they sort of tell a story, that
yep.
individual customer story, and
That's
they
right.
kind of allow you
It
to
is a
see
story.
yourself in
Hmm.
that world, and it's easy to digest because it's another human to another human, and it's very relatable usually, and it's written in plain language. So they can envision themselves with that product, and the work, the work is done, the human connection is made. And we know all the studies and research that a human connection is much more persuasive than traditional marketing endeavors.
That's correct. I mean, just think about it in normal terms. Most of what you do, you want to get your house fixed, you ask people for recommendations, right? You know what I mean? Those are reviews, right? What was your review
Right.
of getting your windows done? And there's plenty of, I didn't even bother to look at statistics for that, but I think we're heavily, rarely do we pick up the phone book and randomly search for strangers,
The phone
and
book.
unless you're desperate, right?
Right.
Phone book. Well, there you go. First of all, you wouldn't have that anymore, but you know what I'm trying to say. You don't
Oh
pull
yeah.
some strange directory out and try to start finding somebody. That's why like Angie's List probably is fairly popular. That they're vetted, right, a little bit, So.
Right.
But yeah, so reviews I think are a whole, there's positive and negative, and I think we, like I said, we touched on them. I don't think that without the negative they'd work if they were all positive all the time. I've been on
You need a
sites
little
like
bit of the
that.
variation
Yeah,
because nothing's perfect.
and even when I talk to customers and clients of mine, I tell them you got to put a few negatives in there. You can't just whitewash
You can't
everything.
hide it. You can't
Right.
hide all of your reviews.
That's correct. Right.
What about the word of mouth piece? Because I think you were mentioning that to me before about how the reviews are also that word of mouth thing.
Yeah, I mean, well, like you mean like in the sense of communicating with the person, in other words.
Well, like the word of mouth isn't like it's like hearing it from a friend, even though
Oh yeah,
it's
right,
not hearing it from a friend.
right. Well, I think we're back to that whole
Yeah.
right. That's why I think reviews are very strong nowadays, but they're I have a feeling they're going to wane over time because of the misuse and abuse and things of that nature. I
Unless
think
they find a great way to validate them. And there's a couple companies out there now that like
they try.
are
Yeah,
trying to make a repository of reviews for
that's right.
different types of platforms, specifically in the software world. Um, I think to help make that a little bit easier and obviously make a ton of advertising money, but
Right.
um,
But they have tightened it, right? You have to at least have bought the product, et cetera, et cetera. But I
right.
mean,
They're
but
actually using AI now and machine learning to not only filter that content for fake versus real, um, but also the psychological intent of the reviewer. So analyzing reviews, hundreds of them, tons of them, right? And then
right.
reporting back buckets and almost categorizing a
Hmm.
classification system to give a tone or a nuance of a product based off of its reviews, which
Well,
can be
that's a
very
good one.
helpful
Yeah, that
for
could be
marketing
very
departments and for
right.
product development, all of that.
Right. And tone has a lot to do with it, right? I mean, are you mad as hell even or happy or why are you happy or right? I guess is that
Oh
what you
yeah,
mean? Those kind of things. Yeah. I mean,
if you get if it reports back that for this one product you keep having a high percentage of the feeling of confusion,
mhm.
okay, well then maybe you're
Something's
not
wrong.
you're
Right.
not explaining that product well to the customer ahead of time, and so there's so much you could
That's yeah, right. And that would
go
show
into
up
that.
in the tonal, you know, the conversation. It would show up in the words they used on that review. I get it completely. And
Yeah,
it can
yeah,
go
and
both
it's cool
ways.
because the AI is analyzing like the way the arrangement of the words, like
All
passive
right.
voice, not like all of that, and kind of putting it together. And you've had some experience. You've been testing out all different kinds of
I've been
software that
dabbling in that area. Yeah, that's why it's kind of
yeah,
fascinating because yeah, the way you use the words and how you use them and what words you choose are the AI can really analyze that, and then I'm using it to help recommend better words or review my my post or whatever I have. Um,
headlines.
Headlines. You can even there's email. You can every time you communicate, it kind of analyzes and you go, "Did you really mean to be negative there?" And you're like, "You really didn't," but you picked the wrong set of words that it could come across negative, or the person will read it in a positive way, but in the back of their mind, it's negative, right? The
Yeah,
whole, you know what
subconscious.
I mean? It's maybe you weren't meaning what you're. Yeah, it's mostly I used it to feed out negativity, but to be honest with you, but then I
Yeah,
don't. I accidentally add in there because I'm an angry person.
right. Well, I mean, everybody. It's the nuance, but then that's like what makes communication so interesting. And even over hundreds and hundreds of years, I mean, language is ever evolving and always changing. So
Yeah, correct.
you're writing a headline for somebody who's in a different generation or even 10 years behind you, that so much can change even by region and location. And as we become global, it's
Oh
even
yeah.
more important to have sort of a baseline.
That's so true. I mean, right. Now, in this sense, these AI algorithms that I'm using don't take in language, but I would think that would be the next step, right? Different,
Like
global,
language regions.
or like tell me, don't use that word. That means, it translates poorly, right? That's what I'm trying to say,
Oh,
maybe,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
So
Mhm.
let's go into some of these. Kind of been talking about like reviews, and we mentioned some recommendations and the best recommendations and how reviews are recommendations. Um, what are some of the different types of recommendation engines being used today? Um, and I know one of the ones, I can start off with the one that we kind of
Yeah,
been
start. You
working on a
pick one
fair
up.
amount. Say that again.
Yeah, go ahead. You mean like, are you thinking of Amazon? Because that's number one.
Yeah. Well, so I was thinking the frequently bought together. I mean, that's
Altogether.
what we
Yeah.
call it. They go by many different names. I mean, what else works well with, maybe
Right.
bought together. Um,
Yeah.
uh,
Kind of
give me some
add-ons.
other
Yeah.
ones.
But Amazon's the biggest elephant in the room here. So yeah,
Right.
that's frequently bought together is the mainstay. And that's the one that they use for their engines, right? That's their recommendation engine.
They call it something different now. They just changed it.
Oh yeah,
They did. They just changed it the other day. I'll look it up. I'll look it up while we're. And by the other day, I mean it could have been like a week ago.
it could be, yeah, we know, right?
Yeah. But I checked the other day. I was like, wait, they changed their wording. But anyway, keep going.
Well, there's like cart upsells, right?
Okay.
There's some, upsells, cross sells. Those are typical, right? They would be recommendations, I think.
Right.
Those would just come to mind. Product upsells. Where are you? Oh, I already went over that one. Product add-ons. We think we already talked about that one. Where
Right.
you would, you need this component or piece. Buy this and get the extension cord or something. And the ones I mentioned earlier, the action feeds, right?
Right.
Somebody else just right. But
So Amazon calls it buy it with now.
oh, is that what it is? Okay, buy it
Yeah,
with.
because it's like before it was frequently bought together because it was only based off of like that history. But as time went on, now they incorporate so much into that algorithm that delivers you that, not just order history, that they're like buy it with. It works well with, right?
Okay, I could see that. Although I think of it still as things that you would buy in combination or in a bundle, right? And
Right. It is,
there's
yeah.
some funny stuff out there on the internet, and I'll come back to that. But Amazon has recommended all kinds of crazy things out there, um, and I think they've been well known for that. Maybe that's why they changed the name because of some of the bad press they got over it.
Yeah,
By putting,
give me an example. Weren't you saying like people were like going to jail or like the
yeah, I
police
did.
were
I
called
was
or
just looking
something?
around for some statistics, and yeah, there was people making bombs in England, and they were, it was recommending bomb components to put together and things of that nature, and
Right.
cyanide, some some things, some chemicals, I imagine,
The
or
other chemicals
things.
with it that make
Right, but if you
bad
put this and
things.
this together, you make some cyanide or something to kill somebody. I mean, so I think they just let it go, and they didn't really have any. They didn't realize that it would put together things that, yeah, people are building bombs, and now that they're just recommending it to other people, and some of it was probably harmless. I mean, I'm not picking on them, but that's one reason why maybe they changed the name. But those have been. I think their AI is much better now. I don't. They probably pull some of that stuff out. It seems like that was a little bit a few years ago. But Netflix is another one I think that comes to mind. All right, aren't they big in that area of recommending what shows to watch and things of that nature?
Yeah, and I think Netflix and Amazon, maybe before we go into the details of each one, the recommendation engine, like that's kind of what
That's what kind of the
it's
term
kind
they
of what
use,
it's
right?
called now. It sort of is this big umbrella of
It's a
phrase,
generic,
like a phrase
right?
that fits a whole bunch of different stuff. It doesn't have to be just like,
Because they're
frequently
completely
bought.
different, right? Netflix and Amazon are completely different algorithms that they're
Oh
using, but
yeah.
they're both
Well, I'm sure there's
recommending.
hundreds of
Yeah.
algorithms that make it up. I think what's interesting about Netflix is they will Netflix is driving you to watch cheaper content for them to produce or what they purchased. So they constantly drive you deep, deep, deep into their library of the stuff that nobody wants to watch from the top level that's popular to decrease
I
their
noticed that.
spend.
Yeah.
And they've actually been very successful. And that's why they have such a large amount of money to spend on new content, is because they they push people down so their rights and royalties and views are lower.
Yeah. It makes
Their
sense.
expenses.
I mean, how many times have you watched a series and realized it was filmed, 5, 10 years ago, and it ended on, the series 3, and you're like, what? I've started Googling them ahead of time to figure out, are they new and are they going to keep going, or do they only have a finite number?
Yeah, and they
Like,
also sandbag them for with journalism. They call it sandbagging. Like I don't know if that's a common term, but sandbagging a story for like a rainy day, like when you don't have a story because it's timeless forever.
right,
But
right.
they're sort of saving these series and stuff, or breathing real new life back into
New life, I've
series that
heard,
were
right,
like
into some old
moderately
ones. Yeah.
successful on cable TV. But the good part about what Netflix can do is like they can target who they show that content
That's
to,
right.
whereas like cable networks 10 years ago, it plays at 8
Yeah,
o'clock, right?
right.
Across the
That's it.
country.
Right.
That's what you
Exactly.
get.
You can't target it. But speaking of targeting, I think it's kind of comical too. If my son goes in there and he watches under my account some, silly teen movie, now I'm getting recommended nothing but teen movies, for another month until it resets itself. It's sort
Yeah.
of like, so there's some
That's why they
bleed
have
over
those
there.
profiles.
Right. They have profiles, but if you don't adhere to them, it
Right.
screws them up. I think,
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And
yeah.
we're going to talk a little bit later when we talk about the future of where this stuff is going, about different models and
Oh, cool.
how a world would look if you had more control over what was recommended to you.
It's a great point, right? I think that's where we're heading, right into. But let's stay with the topics anyway. What is frequently bought together, John? What is the definition of it,
Yeah,
right?
and how it kind of works in e-commerce. So there's a couple different ways that it can be done, and
Mhm.
let's use some specific examples of a shopping store, an e-commerce platform. Uh,
Right.
there's kind of a couple different versions of it. You can get these plugins or extensions that work with your site, and they will generate this content based off of a couple different things. So the
I think
first
it's
one, I kind
standard
of put them
now, right? Yeah.
into three kind of categories: manual, static, like dynamic. And manual is the customer, the store owner, not the customer. The store owner has to go into each product and generate all of the content. They have to say, this product goes with this one, this product goes with this one. It's
Right.
tedious. It's not changing. It's not updating with the time. It's not updating with product lines or data. It's just sitting there. Another one is static, that kind of does a little bit where it sort of is generated by some sort of logic. Usually it's not great. These are kind of the stock ones that WooCommerce
That's what I'm
and
thinking, right? Yeah, WooCommerce and other ones come
Shopify will
built
have.
in.
Yeah.
Right. They're kind of like standard now, right? I think, but they're not
Yeah.
really that good. They're just sort of, like you said, they they do the job, but they're not all that. Yeah.
Right. Right. And a lot of the times it's because they use a lot of resources. They're processor intense,
Mhm.
and the way WooCommerce and some of these platforms work, they would run on the same server that the store is running on, which can cause other problems. Um,
Good
there's
point.
sort of a slew of, they're not really set up to kind of store this data in an efficient way per se. There are ways to do it, of course, but
Sure.
they're
Right.
not
But
set
they're
up
also
out of the
not that
box to do it.
smart, right? I mean, they're not, even for the amount of resources they consume, they really aren't really doing a whole lot, right? I mean, they only have one
Right.
data set to work with, and they only, right. I mean,
Yeah, and they have some weights too that they can apply, and some sliders to set some probability and chance. There's a couple of that, but there isn't really that like learning and improving based
right.
off of
That's what I mean,
um,
right? It's going to
data.
just stick with it over, right? Yeah.
Right. And I
It's
think
not smart.
the end goal is the smart, sort of dynamic, frequently bought together, or recommendations. It doesn't just have to be that. that is not only looking at past order data, is also looking at geography, where is that person located, um, seasonal, time of year. There's so many different things. And then also the changes of time, maybe because of a pandemic or something, you're selling more of another product. Well,
Right.
how can that be put into
Right.
the recommendations to kind of
Sales
make it
volume,
better?
sales, right. Yeah. No, I think you're right. I mean, I could see it. I've seen a lot of poorly done, frequently bought together, but I think those are, as you noted, the standard, built in, because not all these sites are WooCommerce or Shopify. There's a lot of older shopping carts out there, and then I think I've run into a few where they've given me very bad recommendations.
Oh yeah.
Like, really? So I have to think that they were more of the plug-in type, or the built-in one, and then maybe the store owner didn't have the time and energy, or whatever reason, didn't kind of fine-tune it even. Um, because I think, like in gardening and stuff like that, that's a really good example where I've noticed it, because there's companion plants and things you shouldn't put together and whatnot, and it's just recommending things all over the board, things that would not work, insecticides and things. I'm like, really, you're recommending that for this? And I realized that no, it's not. Nobody put any thought into it, so I see that a lot in my, as I like to
Yeah.
garden. But and those sites are all over the place. They're all different shopping carts,
Yeah. And
um,
something interesting that we've kind of been working on with our frequently bought together. Ours lives in the cloud. It's completely external from the site.
oh, that's nice.
In
That's
fact,
better.
like there's one line of code that goes in the head of your site, and it it sort of trickles through all the different products and shows up and disappears based off of that one line of code. But what's sort of cool about ours is it kind of starts at a certain level, and then we can throttle it and change it. It's kind of meant to grow. So initially, you might look at some of these recommendations and be like, that's sort of an odd recommendation. But what the system's kind of doing is putting that information out there because for some reason it has found a correlation when it's
Mm.
running through the algorithm, and it will put that there. And some people are like, why? But for some reason it works. So then now tracking that information and then having it change dynamically is something
Isn't
that
that,
we've been
I mean,
growing
not to
for.
interrupt you, but isn't that the essence of why you want some kind of machine learning? Because it's going to put things out there that you wouldn't have thought to try, and it will find new, right? I mean, that's the idea behind it,
Yeah.
because it's, if we have our, I've set up the whole store, well, then it's my personal recommendations, but I would then never change it because that's my opinion, right? And
Yeah.
I wouldn't take chances or do other things. And
I
so
think
I
there's a
think
misconception sometimes with store owners. They're like, well, why would that be purchased with that? And we're like, well, ask your customer because they
exactly
did. Like
they do, they
the
are
data
right.
shows that that's what they did. Like, so I
That's
think
what
that
I
it's
mean.
it's interesting to
Yeah, I think you
see.
have to do that. You need a machine that's learning, not necessarily, and trying new things, not some static and predefined list of things that you think it should be, right? Yeah, I agree with that. That's probably a huge problem in the industry. People have a bias, good or bad, and it's just going to show up everywhere. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like, you would never do that. Well, hey, look at all your customers who are doing that. What? I get it. Well, that's interesting though. So it's smart and it's changing, right, John? I mean, it will.
Yeah.
So if it sees something, it'll adjust over time. And like if there was like in the pandemic, when there's a run on something, it'll recognize things that are, inventory. Could do anything really, I imagine. If
Yeah. Ours updates every 24 hours. And we're pushing it toward being even more um,
but now that's
dynamic.
resource intense. But you're saying you're taking that data off, right? So it's not on the.
Yeah.
So
All of
that's
our AI components live in the cloud.
isn't that the
And
new way of doing things? I guess like more.
yeah, I mean it's we've put a ton of time and energy and effort into developing a serverless sort of architecture that runs our platform in the cloud, and then we run the AI components pretty much serverless. Um,
I think you're going to have to
generate the
do that
data.
going forward, right? I mean, I think you're following a path. You might be leading the pack, but that's where everybody's going to. They can't do all this crunching on the same web server.
Truly, yeah. I mean, there are just too many variables, and how it will spike up to do the data, and then it sort of sits there. So
Well, I mean,
when I
obviously,
mean
if you
sit
keep
there,
throwing more stuff into it, right? Throw social media into it, throw weather into it, I mean, I can go into the time
it
of
just
season.
grows larger.
Go back to the gardening one, right? What's the time of the season and what you're recommending me? They do
Right.
impact. It's too late to plant that where you live. You know what I mean? Why would you recommend it? But but I mean, the more you throw into it, right? Isn't it going to take more resources and more resources if it's staying on that server? I have to believe that that's going to impact things.
Oh yeah, I mean, a lot of these servers just can't withstand that. They're not designed to, because a lot of the components that protect the store from like attacks or protect it from crashing are this influx of data and this influx of
Mm,
content and information. So it would obviously have to be written for the architecture. And I think that in a lot of these hosting
yeah,
environments, that there's too many of them to sort of make a
right.
good call on which way to go. So having it live externally for us was a way that we could preserve the consistency of the product, and also not weigh your site down. When you look at a server log, or when you look at a
Right.
report of what's heavy on your site, you're not going to see one of our products on there, because it's
Well,
not.
no, and you can't control that with your customers or WooCommerce, right? So they have sometimes they have their own hosting. You can't control their server anyway. So right, you wouldn't want to
Yeah.
be
And a
be
lot of our stuff
responsible.
is also, we do a lot of WooCommerce work. A lot of our stuff, though, is sort of uh, e-commerce platform agnostic, in the sense of it can really live anywhere.
Right, right.
Um, so, yeah, and we have some plans to expand it out down the road.
Oh, nice.
Um,
Shopify and some big
oh yeah,
commerce.
definitely. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, that's cool.
So,
That's
what
interesting.
makes I have a note here about what makes a good recommendation and what makes a bad recommendation.
Okay. I could come up with a lot of bad ones. But a good one
Yeah.
would be, well, a good one would be a lot of combination of things, right? Would it be, not relying on just order data or what I ordered, right? It would be also, you know, I think, well, here's an example. So, if it's constantly telling me this the most popular item, then I'm always going to get fed that information, right?
Right.
And so I would say, well, that sounds like a positive. It actually, over time, I'm not getting to try anything new, right? It's keeping me
Right.
in the. On the other hand, I would say in some cases I would want that. Like if I was, would recommend, well, you last time you bought this particular product, right, or toilet paper, right? Now, so oh, don't forget it, right, and be like, yeah, because that's my favorite brand. Right. I mean, there's probably how do you how does it know when to give you, get out of your comfort zone a little bit, I guess,
Right.
and recommend some other things that you wouldn't have thought of.
When to
Um,
diversify your palette and have you move on to another product line that you
that's the
have.
that's the magic,
Um,
I think, right? Yeah. I
right.
mean,
And they do that kind of through a different. When I say they, I mean the algorithms that are kind of being
algorithms.
used
Yeah,
today, and
I know what you meant,
the
right? Yeah.
styles of it. Um, there's a kind of a couple main three right now. I mean, there's tons of them, but collaborative filtering, content-based filtering,
I've heard of
hybrid
those.
recommendation systems, that sort of kind of do a couple of these different
Oh,
different
okay.
pieces and pull them together.
Gotcha. That's kind of what I'm envisioning, right? It's the
Yeah.
best model one, right? Yeah, and I mean, well, I'm a big fan of, I hate to keep going back to it, but if I could just ask one or two questions, I think sometimes these, the algorithms are doing way too much work trying to guess it. But if they just ask me a question, for example, something pertinent, then I think they could get much closer to it as well. And I think that just hasn't that interactive with the
Right.
AI isn't really there yet with the but if you had virtual assistants or you had someone helping you shop online or in VR as we've talked about before, or, in that case when it says, well, what are you looking for today, or in this case, are you going to use this in the next week or two, it might be a different answer, right, than if if I had said to you, just show me, you would pick something that based on either my past history or some algorithm. And I think you can get much
Yeah.
more
A,
done.
a, a lot of times I think customers and marketing, I say customers, I meant like our clients, they'll say, they're trying to categorize people automatically and kind of drop them in buckets. But I think you
Everybody's in
raise
a
a good
bucket. Yeah,
point.
no, yeah, right.
Is why don't you ask them? Is it so
Is that
bad
the
to be
bucket you want to
asked?
be in? Yeah, yeah,
Is it
exactly.
so bad? Like sometimes, yes, you don't want to, but if somebody's willing to give you that information,
Absolutely.
why not take it?
I know. There seems to be, this is probably the next revolution in my mind. There's going to be where there's slightly some interaction with, and it will be combined with AI because there's no way a human can keep up with it. But it will, every time you come to a site or you come to this, the market, to the brand, however you want to say it, it'll ask you something or interact with you in such a way that back to your models, right? I mean, maybe that's how it builds a model of you.
Yeah.
I think trying to guess and scrape the internet for my social media content, is just not a good idea. It's privacy reasons, and I just
Yeah.
think it's never going to be right. You need to ask.
It's going to come to a place where we need some sort of broker, sort of that acts like a bank, and the currency is money, right? In a bank, in this
Right.
instance, the data models of you, that's the currency. So if we can make that a standard, and then you can also say, I have private pieces of my model and I have public facing pieces. When I go to shop online, when I go to a store, I pass off like a handshake to that store what my models are.
Like your
And
cookie, right? Like,
sure,
I know
yeah,
I'm
I think cookie,
oversimplifying it, but
yeah,
but yeah, like here's my cookie. No, give me a cookie. Here's my cookie. It tells you everything about me and
right,
that I want to share so that it can help you guide me to the right product. But I'm not giving you everything. I'm giving you what I publicly want to share. Kind of like on
right.
your profile on social media. You get to pick and choose, right?
Yeah,
I
and
guess
there's also a private component too, that the models on the back end and the broker, right, can sort of act a little bit on your behalf. And even though it's keeping some information private, when information comes in, it can also give other information without giving all of your private stuff away. It
mm,
can say that you like this or you like this without giving all of that background
no, I get it.
information.
All right. Oh, I see. As a broker, so it'd be sort of like the website or the e-commerce or however would ask it a
Mhm.
question, and it would still keep your info private, but maybe answer it in a certain way that would be helpful, but without letting loose the secret,
Right.
right?
That's relevant to what they need it
Really cool.
for.
That sounds really well. That does sound like where we have to go because I think just them trying to scoop up every piece of information and big data on is it's not going to really it's not who I am today is what I was yesterday, and I don't think it'll by the time they calculate it all down. I think some countries are trying to do stuff like that, so they can monitor their
Oh, sure. It could very well be a government agency, not
government
a
agency
private
kind of
piece.
thing, yeah, big data. But I mean, for my shopping experience, I don't know. I think I would rather, like you said, have a model. I would love to subscribe to that idea. Are you building that? Is
Right.
that
Please. Yeah. Wouldn't that be awesome? And contextual information is so important too. Knowing of all of these different things together and how they connect and how they relate and how much they weight is
right?
important. All the features of a person, all the features of the things that you like, siloed individually, they're less valuable. But together with contextual perspective, you gain so much more
Absolutely. Yeah,
understanding of it.
and I think that's why. I mean, to bring it all back, I mean, that's why I think the frequently bought together or how recommendation engine, however we want to go backwards, even got it has to improve and it has to have some AI in it. I think, and that's where to be effective, really, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
I mean, I
And
think
then go ahead.
no, I just think that's just like the baseline now. It's
Yeah.
now that's what it is. That's 2022 right now. You can't the review stuff. I think they could use the AI into helping, you know, go through the review. One of the problems with reviews, right, is, um, and I hear this all the time, is I don't have time to go and approve them all. I don't have time to review them all. And, it's a time consuming, so they outsource that. But like if you said, if the outsource company had some really good machine learning in there, then they could really maybe do a lot better with the reviews, right?
Yeah, there's some of them that are popping up now, especially for like explicit content, to try to like filter them out ahead of time. But being
Yeah.
able to do something valuable with those reviews and act on them too is even more important. Maybe you're able to get that review, help that customer automatically, and then have them automatically send them another one to rewrite a review, and you can sort of fix that problem. There's some of that stuff now, but it's not always done in the smartest of ways.
No, and I think we could do a whole episode on reviews and how to,
Oh,
because
totally. Yeah.
managing your negative reviews is the one thing I consult on all the time. It's not always the positive. People won't talk about the positive, but it's really managing the negative. I mean, to be honest.
And I think so. On closing this one out, I think something I want to point out is that the recommendation engines and starting to develop these recommendation libraries and this data on your product base, it doesn't always have to just be used for product recommendations. There's a whole world and of things that you can do with that information once you have it, and kind of getting it and having it like frequently brought together is just a really good place to start and kind of get in on that early so that you're able to reap the rewards of that down the road.
I hear you. It's like preaching to the choir. It's sort of like we were saying with if you want to start sending SMS messages, right? You need to start asking for phone numbers. Right? You know what I mean?
Start asking now.
Yeah, now's the time to get into some machine learning and AI and start that process, because there's probably lots of areas you could use it.